You know the photograph. June 5th, 1968. The Ambassador Hotel kitchen. Ethel Kennedy kneeling beside her dying husband. The perfect wife frozen forever in grief. America decided that image was the whole marriage. It wasn't. Bobby Kennedy dated her sister first. Ethel spent 18 years proving she belonged to a family that, according to one attributed remark, wouldn't give her own relatives the time of day. She buried her family's scandals to survive his. And the kneeling widow everyone pitied? She ended up holding the one thing historians begged for and couldn't touch. It all started on a ski slope. December 1945, Mont Tremblant, Quebec. Jean Kennedy brought her Manhattanville college roommate on a family ski trip. A loud, fearless 17-year-old named Ethel Skakel. Her brother, Bobby, came too. He barely noticed Ethel, and there was a reason. He was dating her older sister, Patricia, the prettier one, the calmer one. For roughly 2 years, Bobby Kennedy courted Pat Skakel, while Ethel watched from the edge of her own family, cracking jokes, organizing games, making herself impossible to ignore and easy to overlook at the same time. When Bobby and Pat drifted apart, he turned to the sister, who had been auditioning the whole time. Ethel got him. Second, she never talked about it that way, of course. But to understand why a woman would spend 2 decades trying to out-Kennedy the Kennedys, you have to understand what she was trying to leave. The Skakels were richer than the Kennedys, and far less controlled. George Skakel started as an $8 a week railroad clerk and built Great Lakes Carbon into one of the largest privately held companies in America. In 1936, he installed his 7 children in a 31-room manor on Lake Avenue in Greenwich, Connecticut, and then, by most accounts, let them run wild. Biographers who later interviewed Greenwich neighbors describe a household of guns, wrecked cars, heavy drinking, and boys who treated the town as a private amusement park. Ethel's father was a Protestant who kept his distance from the family's faith. Her mother, Anne, was a fiercely devout Catholic who drilled the religion into her daughters. Ethel absorbed 2 lessons early. God was not negotiable, and family embarrassments were not discussed. Both would run her entire life. There is a detail from her school years that friends recalled decades later. Ethel seriously considered becoming a nun. Take that with the caution any late recollection deserves, but it fits the record. The same girl who was famous for pranks and recklessness was also the most rigid Catholic in almost any room she entered. Keep that combination in mind. It explains a marriage that outsiders would later find impossible to explain. Her courtship of Bobby Kennedy was less a romance than a campaign. In 1946, while he was still half attached to her sister, Ethel volunteered in Jack Kennedy's first congressional race, ringing doorbells in Boston for a family she hadn't yet joined. At Manhattanville, she wrote her senior thesis on Jack's book, Why England Slept. Read that again. She wrote her college thesis on her future brother-in-law's book. One hostile 1994 biography claims her first crush was actually Jack himself. That claim rests on unnamed friends and should stay in the attributed pile. What's documented is enough. Before Bobby ever proposed, Ethel had studied the Kennedys the way other students studied for exams, and she had decided which world she wanted. Bobby, for his part, got something too. He was the 7th child, the runt of the operation, unathletic by Kennedy standards, overshadowed by Joe Jr.'s ghost and Jack's charm. Ethel believed in him with a ferocity nobody else offered. Friends from those years describe her as his loudest cheerleader before he had done anything worth cheering. That devotion was real. It was also, functionally, her entry ticket. Even the courtship carried warning signs, if anyone had wanted to read them. Bobby was awkward, moralistic, and slow. Friends recalled a suitor so hesitant that Ethel's convent idea resurfaced mid-relationship. And she reportedly joked that her competition wasn't another girl, it was God. However that story is embroidered, the shape of the record is clear. This was not a man swept away. This was a man deciding, carefully, that the loud, Skakel girl who adored him fit the life his family required. Her money didn't hurt. Her Catholicism didn't hurt. Her willingness to subordinate everything to him was the main event. They got engaged in February 1950 and married on June 17, 1950, at St. Mary's Church in Greenwich, in front of a crowd befitting the merger it was. The Boston Globe said the quiet part in print. The marriage unites two large fortunes, not two hearts. Two fortunes. The wedding itself previewed the next 40 years with almost cruel precision. On the Kennedy side, discipline, choreography, political usefulness, Jack served as best man and treated the reception like a campaign stop. On the Skakel side, according to multiple biographer accounts, Ethel's brothers and their friends turned the celebration into a demolition derby of drunken pranks that mortified the bride. She was marrying out of one chaotic dynasty into a colder, more organized one, and the organized one was watching her relatives with contempt. How much contempt? Years later, Jerry Oppenheimer's unauthorized biography, a hostile book, built on hundreds of interviews, so weigh it accordingly, attributed a line to Bobby about his in-laws. If he weren't married to Ethel, he wouldn't give those micks the time of day. Whether he said those exact words, we can't prove. What we can document is Ethel's behavior, and her behavior said she believed something like it. From the early 1950s on, she oriented her entire existence toward Hyannisport and away from Greenwich. Oppenheimer's sources say she all but disowned the Skakels. The pattern of her public life supports the direction, if not the phrasing. Her family of birth essentially vanishes from her story. What replaced it was a system, and the system had rules. Rule 1. Produce. Rose Kennedy had 9 children. Ethel would eventually have 11, a child roughly every 18 months from 1951 to 1968. As if fertility were a competitive event, and in that family it was. Rule 2. Serve the machine. In 1952, the young couple moved into a Boston rooming house so Bobby could run Jack's Senate campaign. And Ethel, pregnant, organized the famous tea parties that put the candidate in front of thousands of women voters. Rule 3. Your husband belongs to the family first. Bobby's career ran through Jack, and Jack's career ran through their father, and Ethel's job was to keep the household running while the men were somewhere else. She didn't resist any of this. She excelled at it loudly, in a way some in-laws found exhausting. The nickname she earned inside the family circle was telling. People joked she was more Kennedy than the Kennedys. It was a compliment with a knife in it. You only try that hard when you know you weren't born in. Watch how the hierarchy worked at Hyannisport, because the compound was the family's true capital. Old Joe Kennedy set the schedules, the expectations, and the political priorities. Rose set the religious tone. The brothers competed at everything from sailing to touch football, and the wives were graded, informally but unmistakably, on enthusiasm and output. Ethel thrived, where Jackie visibly suffered. She threw herself into the games, memorized the family's jokes, matched Rose novena for novena, and produced grandchildren at a pace that delighted her father-in-law. Contemporary observers noticed what that eagerness cost her. She had no room of her own in that world, no identity that wasn't issued by the family, and no fallback if the family ever withdrew its approval. Jackie could retreat into books in Paris. Joan could retreat into music. Ethel had burned the road back to Greenwich. The Kennedys were not just her in-laws, they were her entire remaining architecture. Then, in one afternoon, the family she'd been quietly leaving was gutted. On October 3, 1955, months after Ethel delivered her 4th child, her parents' private plane went down near Union City, Oklahoma. Both were killed. Here is where the marriage shows you what it actually was. There was no long public mourning, no visible turn back toward Greenwich. Friends later described her grief as intense and almost entirely private, sealed off, the way her mother had taught her family matters should be. Within a year, she and Bobby were buying Hickory Hill, the 13-bedroom estate in McLean, Virginia, from Jack and Jackie, who were letting it go after Jackie's stillbirth. Ethel took over the house where her sister-in-law's hopes had collapsed and turned it into the loudest address in Washington. If you're tracking who Ethel Skakel became, that's the moment. Orphaned by the family she distanced, doubling down on the family that tolerated her. Hickory Hill is where the public myth got manufactured, and it's worth pausing on how good the product was. Newspapers and magazines showed America a glorious circus, 11 kids, a menagerie of horses, dogs, and at one point a sea lion, touch football on the lawn, seminars where cabinet officials debated philosophy, parties where fully dressed guests ended up in the swimming pool. In 1962, the historian Arthur Schlesinger went into that pool in his suit, and Washington talked about it for weeks. Ethel was cast as the anti-Jackie. Unpretentious, fun, fertile, devout. Voters loved it. The family loved it. Reporters loved being invited. Now look behind it. The man of the house was almost never in the house. Through the McClellan Committee years and then as Attorney General, Bobby worked hours that made him a visitor in his own home. And Ethel ran an estate of 12 children and rotating staff essentially alone, while pregnant most of the time. The famous chaos read as joy in photographs. Day to day, according to people who worked there, it was closer to an unmanned ship. Later accounts from staff and tradesmen filtered through that hostile 1994 biography. So hold them loosely. Describe bills left unpaid for months, a revolving door of governesses and cooks, and a mistress of the house who could be generous 1 hour and volcanic the next. What no one disputes is the arithmetic. Between 1951 and 1968, Ethel was pregnant 11 times, buried both parents and a brother, ran a 13-bedroom estate, and served as hostess for the most socially demanding household in Washington, while her husband prosecuted Jimmy Hoffa, ran the Justice Department, and belonged in every meaningful hour to his brother's administration. The legend says Bobby made it home for dinner. Sometimes he did. The legend does not mention how often dinner was the entire appearance. And the marriage's ledger was not balanced in other ways, if you believe the whispers, so let's handle the whispers honestly, because this is where most tellings of this story go wrong. The Marilyn Monroe rumor, the one everyone knows, is weaker than its fame. Serious biographers who went looking, Evan Thomas, Larry Tye, working from archives and hundreds of interviews, found no solid evidence that Bobby Kennedy had an affair with Monroe, and several concluded the story grew out of a handful of documented meetings inflated by conspiracy writers after both were dead. Correcting that legend matters because it clears the fog around something more credible and more uncomfortable. Oppenheimer's sources, friends of Ethel speaking anonymously, claimed Bobby had other flings, in one account, just like Jack, with the wives of friends. Unconfirmed, interested witnesses. But even Ethel's sympathetic chroniclers concede the essential asymmetry. She worshipped him with a totality he did not visibly return. And in that family, a wife's job description did not include asking questions. Whatever Bobby did or didn't do in private, Ethel's public posture never wavered by a millimeter. Either there was nothing to forgive, or forgiving silently was simply another duty. The record cannot settle which, and honest tellers should say so. What the record does show is rivalry inside the sisterhood of Kennedy wives. Ethel and Jackie circled each other for years, the Earth Mother and the aesthete. And people around them later recalled Ethel mocking Jackie's breathy voice and grand manners while privately smarting that Jackie got the White House, the magazine covers, and the mystique. Those recollections came late and secondhand, but the structural fact underneath them is solid. The family had one queen's crown, and Ethel, who had sacrificed the most to belong, was never going to wear it. Then Dallas. November 1963 didn't just kill the president, it nearly dissolved the man Ethel had built her life around. Bobby fell into a depression that his biographers describe in unsparing terms. Gaunt, withdrawn, wearing his dead brother's old coat, disappearing into grief for the better part of a year. And here is a private wound hiding inside a public tragedy. The person who could reach him in that darkness was not always his wife. Contemporary accounts describe Bobby and the widowed Jackie bound together in mourning, while Ethel, whose faith made grief almost a theological error, since Jack was surely in heaven, kept the household loud and the sorrow off limits. She responded the only way she knew: activity, more children, and a relentless push to get Bobby moving again. When he ran for the Senate from New York in 1964, she campaigned pregnant again, and the machine restarted. The middle of the decade delivered 2 more blows to the family she no longer spoke of. In September 1966, her brother, George Jr., by then running Great Lakes Carbon, died in a plane crash, eerily echoing their parents. Almost exactly a year later, his widow choked to death during a meal at home. 4 Skakel deaths, 2 decades, and virtually none of it entered Ethel's public story, then or ever. The Greenwich family kept generating tragedy and scandal. Years later, a Skakel nephew would stand trial in one of America's most notorious murder cases, and Ethel's genius, if that's the word, was containment. She had learned in a 31-room house full of secrets that you do not explain your family. You outrun it. Which brings us to the decision that ended everything, and to the most uncomfortable documented fact in this story. The 1968 campaign was substantially her doing. When Bobby agonized for months over challenging a sitting president, his advisors split, his brother Ted urged caution, and Ethel pushed. Biographer Evan Thomas, no sensationalist, called her Bobby's most consistent advocate of a race for the White House. She teased him for hesitating. She invoked his dead brother. She wanted the crown that had gone to Jackie's husband, and she believed, genuinely, that Bobby was America's best hope. Both things were true at once. In March 1968, he declared, and Ethel, pregnant with their 11th child, went out on the trail beside him, radiating the family circus image one more time for the cameras. For a few months, the marriage was what the myth always claimed. 2 people fused into one purpose. Visibly happy, visibly effective. If you want to know why she stayed all those years, look at the spring of 1968. That partnership was real. That was the payoff. There's a night from that campaign worth holding on to. April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King is assassinated, and Bobby, against police advice, climbs onto a flatbed truck in a black neighborhood of Indianapolis and delivers, unscripted, one of the great speeches in American history. Ethel was with him on that trip, visibly pregnant, and the crowds those weeks treated the couple as a single organism, hands reaching for both of them, her wedding ring reportedly torn off more than once in the crush. After 17 years of waiting rooms and delivery rooms, she was finally standing where the history was happening. Whatever this marriage had cost her, in April and May of 1968, it looked like the investment of her life paying out. It lasted 11 weeks. On June 4th, 1968, Bobby won the California primary. Earlier that day at Malibu, he had pulled their 12-year-old son David out of a dangerous undertow, a detail preserved in multiple accounts. Just after midnight, walking through the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel, he was shot. Ethel, 3 months pregnant, was steps behind him. The photograph from that kitchen floor, her kneeling, one hand raised to hold back the crowd, became one of the most famous images in American history within hours. What the cameras didn't show. Upstairs in the hotel, David watched his father's shooting live on television, alone, hours after his father had saved his life. Bobby died the next day. Oppenheimer later claimed the family quietly made the decision to end life support after he was declared beyond recovery. The family has never detailed those hours, and that account remains his. 6 months later, on December 12th, Ethel gave birth to a daughter, Rory, whose father had been dead half a year. The funeral gave the myth its final coat of paint. 2 million people lined the tracks as the train carried Bobby's body from New York to Washington, and Ethel, weeks into a pregnancy and days into widowhood, walked the length of the cars thanking supporters one by one, a performance of composure that reporters aboard never forgot. It was genuinely brave. It was also the moment she took over the family business of grief, and she would run it her way. America expected the widow to disappear into black. Instead, something harder and stranger happened. And this is where the story most people know stops being the story that occurred. Within months, Ethel helped establish the Robert F. Kennedy Memorial, the seed of what became Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, installing herself as the permanent keeper of his causes. Migrant workers, Native American rights, the poor. Publicly, she was magnificent. Privately, by the accounts of people inside Hickory Hill, the house tipped into something darker. She refused, essentially forever, to speak about the assassination. Not to reporters, and far more consequentially, not to her children. Her sons later told interviewers, including the biographers Peter Collier and David Horowitz, that their father's death was simply not discussable at home. Grief went underground, the way Skakel grief always had. The older boys spiraled into drugs, expulsions, and a shuffle of boarding schools. Staff turnover became chronic. Oppenheimer's sources, again hostile and again unnamed, said employees called the estate Horror Hill because of her rages and accused her of berating and stiffing household workers. Those specific stories should be labeled what they are, allegations from an unauthorized book. But the broader wreckage is not in dispute. David, the boy from the Malibu surf and the hotel television, died of a drug overdose in a Palm Beach hotel in April 1984 at 28. After years of addiction his family's official story had no room for. Michael died in a reckless skiing accident in 1997, months after a scandal of his own. Ethel buried 2 sons the way she had buried her parents, her brother, and her husband, publicly composed, privately sealed. Inside the family, meanwhile, the second-choice sister-in-law quietly became the moral center of gravity. With Jack and Bobby gone, Ethel's 11 children made her household the dynasty's future, and her approval started to matter in ways it never had while her husband was alive. When Chappaquiddick disgraced Ted in 1969, Oppenheimer's sources describe Ethel as privately furious at the surviving brother for failing the standard her dead one had set, a late, interested account, but consistent with everything else we know about how she ranked the men in that family. The Kennedys had absorbed her in 1950. By 1970, she was absorbing them. And she never remarried, not once, across 56 years of widowhood. When the singer Andy Williams began escorting her to events in the 70s, the gossip columns married them off repeatedly. Both insisted, for decades, that the friendship was platonic, and no evidence ever contradicted them. In 1991, she gave People magazine the line that defined her second act. Remarrying would be adultery. How could she? With Bobby looking down from heaven? You can hear that as devotion. You can also hear it as the final form of the deal she made in 1950. She had traded her identity for the name Kennedy, and the widowhood was the last office she would ever hold. She did not intend to resign. Here's what almost nobody noticed while they were pitying her. After the assassination, the National Archives agreed to something extraordinary. It let Ethel Kennedy take control of her husband's papers. Not the government. The widow. For more than 4 decades, dozens of boxes from Bobby's years at the center of American power, including material touching the Cuban Missile Crisis, sat at the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library under family control, and historians who wanted them had to ask the Kennedys. Many asked. Most waited. Scholars complained publicly for years that the fullest record of Robert Kennedy and of the marriage was hostage to the person with the most invested in one version of it. Access, when it came selectively. Arthur Schlesinger, the same family friend who'd gone into the Hickory Hill pool in his suit, was granted the papers for his affectionate 1978 biography, the one the family blessed. Writers the family trusted got in. Writers that didn't waited or worked around the edges, and every waiting year hardened the love story version into settled history. Substantial releases only began around 2012, timed to the missile crisis's 50th anniversary, and even then the family's fingerprints were on the process. The woman remembered as the passive half of a great man's story spent half a century as the gatekeeper of that story's evidence. She curated the softer channels too. The definitive film about her life, the 2012 documentary Ethel, was made by her own daughter Rory, the child born after the assassination, with Ethel's cooperation and on Ethel's terms. In it, when the conversation approaches June 1968, the 83-year-old matriarch simply declines, waving the subject away on camera. The refusal made it into the final cut, which tells you the filmmakers understood. The silence was the portrait. 2 years later, President Obama hung the Presidential Medal of Freedom around her neck. When she died in Boston on October 10, 2024, at 96, 3 presidents eulogized her, and the obituaries ran the kitchen photograph one more time, captioned with the love story. So look at the photograph again. A kneeling woman, one hand raised. For 56 years, America read that gesture as helplessness, a wife losing everything on a hotel floor. But follow what that hand did next. It took the papers. It built the foundation. It decided which questions her children could ask, which boxes historians could open, which version of an 18-year marriage, The second choice courtship, the vanished Skakels, the absent husband, the unexamined rumors, the sons who broke under the silence, would survive as the official love story. The girl from Greenwich learned one skill before she learned anything else: how to bury a family's truth and smile through the funeral. She married into a dynasty, and in the end, she outperformed it at its own specialty. Bobby Kennedy got the martyrdom. Ethel got the archive, and the archive, not the marriage, is the thing she never let anyone touch.